Mike Torreano. Welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's great to be here with you. You've got a very successful podcast feature, so I'm glad to be with you.
Well, I really love talking to members of Rocky Mountain fiction writers and those who are presenting to Rocky Mountain fiction writers and just providing a little opportunity to get your voice out via the wonderful world of podcasting. So it's my pleasure and it's great to have you on and catch up. Where we're catching you in Arizona, right? But is that your winter home?
Yes, we're down south side of Phoenix in Chandler. So the weather is pretty darn nice, but we're going back to Colorado next week. So hopefully we'll hit a warm Gulf Stream there.
Yeah. You're not going to the Super Bowl on Sunday, are you?
Heck no. This place has got the Waste Management Open here this week, which is a big deal, as well as a Super Bowl. So the place is crowded and the prices are nuts. Yeah. You need to sell a few books to be able to afford a ticket. Yeah, maybe I'll stand on a corner and just hold a couple up or something like that.
Yeah. That's great. Very good. Where do you live when you do come back to Colorado?
Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, we're in the Springs.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a new book. Latest release just came out or is on the way. White Sands Gold. Is that on the way or already out?
That was out in September.
Okay.
Last fall. Yep. But okay. I have another one coming out in probably 2-3 months. Fireflies at Dusk. It's my first non-Western. So kind of excited about that.
Well, we want to talk about White Sands Gold and we want to talk about the one that's coming out, Fireflies at Dusk. But why don't you just take us back a little bit and tell us, how long have you been writing and when did you really, dive in and take it seriously?
Well, I've been writing and teaching English and composition, etc., for a long time in my career and elsewhere. But wasn't until I retired that I got more serious about writing a book, a novel. And I said to my wife, I think I'm going to try and write a book. And she just kind of nodded and smiled a little bit. And then when I finished the first one, I said to her, I wasn't sure I could do that. And she said, I wasn't sure either. So it's been about 10 years. I've been writing seriously.
Yeah. Where did you teach?
Oh, I taught at the United States Air Force Academy. I taught English. And I also taught composition and journalism at University of Colorado Springs.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Great. And how long did you teach altogether?
Oh, gosh, it was only 3-4 years until I made I was in the midst of a career change when I got off active duty Air Force. And so then I started on what became my full-time careers. I was still in the Air Force Reserve after active duty. And I joined Northwestern Mutual Financial Network as a financial advisor, where I spent the next 30 plus years. So, yeah.
Wow. But you've always had this love of reading and writing?
Absolutely. I come from a family of wordsmiths. My mother, God rest her soul, she was a storyteller. And it was fabulous just to listen to her tell episodes of her growing up years. And she put so much detail in, and she just roped me in along the way. And my father was also very much a wordsmith. So one thing my mother imparted to me was a love of recitation, which is kind of a lost art these days. And so I've, over the years, memorized several poems that I pull out at will.
Yeah, that's great. Did you have any siblings who caught the same bug for writing and reading?
All three of us were wordsmiths and storytellers. Funny story, in high school, they had every year there was a school-wide writing contest. And my sister, who was the oldest one, she won it in high school. And then my brother, who was a little older than me, he won it in high school. And then I didn't win it.
Yeah.
But I went on to become the writer of the three. So kind of interesting.
That's great. What was your biggest challenge did you find when you first put together a novel length story? What was the biggest challenge or thing you learned about the process writing that first novel?
Well, I think all of us, whether you're beginning or whether you're experienced, you gravitate to a model for writing that you feel most comfortable with. And so for many folks, it's the plotters where you do storyboard and all the sticky back notes on the board, and you've got the whole story lined out before you put pen to paper. And wow, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, me, I don't do that either. Yeah.
I'm a total pantser, seat of the pants writer. And if you look in the dictionary under pantser, you're going to see my picture. So for me as a pantser, the challenge wasn't starting writing, because I could start a novel and figure out where the novel was basically going in the next scene, but I didn't have the 50,000 foot level of what was going to happen in the novel. And it sounds like, Mark, you do the same thing, maybe. But I just barely have a grasp of where the next scene is going to be. And so it becomes, for me, difficult to navigate my way through once I start, as opposed to the plotter who, boy, man, they can breeze right through once they start. So just whatever you're comfortable with, I think, is what we end up with.
Yeah. Did you always know when you started to write that you'd probably have a Western theme, at least at the start, you'd be doing Western style novels?
Well, it's always in the back of my head, because I grew up in Cincinnati, and back in the 5th grade, I had a wonderful teacher, and this just goes to show what impact a good teacher can have on you. But she made us read a book a week and write a written report, and somebody was going to give that in class, so he had to be ready. And so the first week she took us down to the little school library, and she said, pick a book. And so I'm kind of scanning the spines, and I see this very unusual name, Zane Grey. And I said, what's a Zane Grey? And I pulled it off, and I forget what novel it was that I first read, but I read that thing, and I could see the painted desert. I could see the cowboys and Indians racing along the red sandstone bluffs and the landscapes of the Old West. And it just hooked me back in 5th grade. And so when I got serious about writing, I said, let's see if I can write a Western, a la my inspiration, Zane Grey.
Did you go on to read a whole bunch of Zane Greys?
I read every one I could put my hands on. And
there are quite a few, aren't there?
Oh yeah, he's got about 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are transfixing. There's something kind of simple in a good way, I guess. They're easy to follow. The stakes are always very clear. The research is good, obviously. He was really good with his details, his research details. What else did you like about him in particular?
Well, the way, as you just stated, the way he's able to draw the description and draw the reader into the scene. As you say, it's not overdone.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of Hemingway as being a sparse writer, but yet full of impact, Zane Grey was the same way.
Yeah.
And so when you are a little more sparse, you leave it up to the reader. You bring the reader along to a certain point, and then you leave it up to the reader to make their mind up on what's happening. And so that helps draw the reader further into the story.
Now, did you go from Zane Grey to Louis L'Amour or any of the other Western writers, or are you pretty much just a Zane Grey guy?
Well, no, Louis L'Amour. How could you not read Louis L'Amour?
Okay. Yeah.
And I never read Elmore Leonard extensively, Cormac McCarthy, but I've branched out into some of those other Western writers, and wow, they're just sparkling.
Yeah. Some people forget Elmore Leonard had some good Westerns in his list of books he wrote. They're really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's great. That's great. So White Sands Gold, when it came out last year, was book number what in your
book 4.
Okay. And are those novels interconnected, or they're completely separate?
No, the first two were released in 2016, 2018, set in South Park, Colorado. And those are connected, first and a sequel. And then I pivoted to A Score to Settle, which occurs in 1870 along the Pecos River, New Mexico territory on the Goodnight Loving Cattle Trail, because I got enamored of the history of the Goodnight Loving Trail and Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving and how they established that route there. And then I had a friend come to me and he says, I got the idea for your next book. And maybe you've had the same experience. I think many of us writers have, where our friends come and say, oh, I got a great idea or whatever. But he had a great idea. He said, there's a legend of an untold treasure of gold bars supposedly stashed under a mountain north of Las Cruces, Victoria Peak, named after Chief Victoria of the Chiricahua Apaches. And no one knows how it got there. And so he'd been researching that area, actually laying claims to different areas there. And I was a little skeptical. I went home and I put in to the browser White Sands Gold, and wow, all this stuff popped up. And I said, whoa, I might be able to make something of this. And been very gratified. White Sands Gold has received 3 literary awards so far, and it's got a good number, 50 plus Amazon reviews. And so, yeah.
That's great. Wow. What was the key to you to, that sounds like it was a little bit different than the others in some ways, in terms of just something about it clicked differently for you.
Yeah. It's the underlying legend is the first thing that appealed to me. And so that was different than my previous 3 books. And so I said, okay, I've got an underlying legend here. What can I do with that? And for any newer writers, I would say find an anchor for your story. Find an anchor that you can hang on to and build on. Starting from nothing is a lot harder than starting with some kind of a literary anchor. And for me, that was the legend of this fabulous stash of gold bars.
Huh. And there's a mystery element to it too, as well, correct?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, in your story, not in the issue of how the White Sands Gold came to be, how the treasure came to be, but in your story, they're set up like a mystery.
It's a mystery. All of my novels are mysteries, except for the Fireflies coming out.
Right.
But not only is the mystery, did I carry the mystery into the novel, White Sands Gold, but how those bars got there is a mystery. Actually got there. There's about 4 legend how they were placed there. And I don't think anybody's going to ever figure that one out. And as my favorite character in White Sands Gold says, and I won't reveal who that is, but my favorite character says, maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved.
Does your book pick a theme and pick one of those 4 options and lean heavily into it? No. Okay.
No, I put breadcrumbs, and I think we all do that as writers. I put breadcrumbs of how it might have gotten here, and then the second way it might have gotten here, and then later third and fourth, and I let the reader decide, what do they think? How did they think the gold got there? And I've gotten some tremendous feedback on that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, tell us about the 3 awards.
Oh, White Sands Gold got a Firebird Book Award for fiction, got an American Book Award finalist award, and from Literary Titan got a Gold Award for
excellent
Western fiction. Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
For those who don't know, just, I mean, that's really interesting sort of, tip is, make sure if you publish a book to look for award opportunities out there in terms of creating good PR for yourself. Talk to us about how you did that, and how do you purposely look, and how do you go about making sure they're submitted and all that kind of thing?
Well, there are the most prominent book awards that we all know, especially in our own genre. And for me, it's Western Writers Spur Award, and then Will Rogers Medallion Award for Western Fictioneers. But below those 2, there are so many organizations that award. And so I've got a little pop-up, and it pops up every now in my email, and it says, here's another prospective award. And then I take a look at it and see if it's a good fit from a genre standpoint, and if I want to apply for it or not. But you're right, Mark. We work hard as authors in producing a novel, which is kind of incredible in itself. If you think about writing a novel, how many people do that? And then once we've done that, it's appropriate to start looking for award opportunities for our work.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. That's great. Before we get to Fireflies at Dusk, and we will get there, tell us about your connection and just what Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers has meant to you, because I know you've been a very, very steady presence at Colorado Gold conferences and engaged, even though you're based in Colorado Springs. I mean, RMFW has members from all over the state. In fact, many members from around the country. But what has RMFW meant to you and your writing career?
Well, it's a special conference. Each conference has its own tone and its own tendencies, if you will. And for me, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, other than like Western Writers of America Conference, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers has a slice of Western flavor to it, being in Denver. And so I can connect with other authors, Western authors, and that's always enjoyable. So I like that. And then the mastering the art sessions, master your craft sessions of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, I think are probably unequaled. It's such a popular conference and well known that it attracts the top people from around the country to be presenters. And so here we have an opportunity to sit at the feet of the masters and learn from them. So wonderful conference.
Yep, that's great. So when you finished White Sands Gold, had you already started working on Fireflies at Dusk? And was that an idea of your own this time as opposed to White Sands Gold? Or, kind of a bundle of questions here, but what made you turn the corner away from the kinds of previous things you had been writing?
Well, very interesting genesis to Fireflies. It was actually my first novel that I completed in about 2013, 2014.
Oh. So this is the one that you told your wife you're going to go write a book.
Yes, this is the one.
Okay. All right.
I've always been a Civil War buff. And so I have been always intrigued by George McClellan, one of the Union commanders in the Civil War. And I said, well, I'm going to write a book about McClellan. And I said, okay, well, McClellan, I'm not going to do it first person. So I've got to see McClellan through somebody else's eyes. And so I created this young man on his staff, Jonathan. And then I said, well, let's see where Jonathan comes from. And so the novel really is it's a coming of age novel. It's not about the war. It's about Jonathan and the coming of age. He's raised in a pacifist family and he rejects that. And that's the real twist in the whole story. And then eventually does get on McClellan's staff. But as one of my critique partners said years ago, she said, I don't care about McClellan. I care about Jonathan. And that was a revelation to me as a new writer. Well, I sent it in. We shotgun to agents and editors. I sent it in and I got a response from one publisher, and it was not a form rejection, but she went into great detail about why it wasn't ready. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do these other things. I was very impressed with that. And so about 8 months later, I emailed her and I said, you don't remember me, but you rejected me so nicely. I appreciate it. And I've got a new novel that I'm working on now, my first Western. And is there anybody at the Wild Rose Press who would be interested in seeing it? And she said, send it to me when it's ready. When it's ready. And then I got the congratulations email from her down the road. But a rejection led to my first contract for another book. And then, So Fireflies was on the electronic shelf for about 8 years. I was moving on to my Westerns. And finally, last year, I just said, you know what? Let's see if we can't polish this thing up. And I finally did and sent it in. Yeah.
Wow. What when you pulled it back out and took a look at it, what were the major things you saw that needed improvement?
Oh, it was awful.
Yeah.
And that's the case with my first drafts. They're terrible. And that's part and parcel of being a pantser. You're just writing. And, you're not thinking about so much about how the novel is coherent or the story arc or anything. You're just writing, get it down on paper. It's like NaNoWriMo in November. Just get it down on paper, but then it's awful. And so I was, my point of view was wandering all over the place. For example, I was very wordy. I tend to be more sparse now. And as I sent it in, it was 25,000 words less than when I sent it in all those years ago.
Wow.
So tighten. Yeah.
Wow. Was it always called Fireflies at Dusk? And what does that title reference?
Well, there's a love interest theme throughout the story, even though Jonathan goes off the rails after he leaves home. But there's a love interest theme, and that scene in there when Jonathan and Barbara first really develop some feelings from each other. It's at dusk on a picnic, and the fireflies come up out of the grasses and they just light around them, and it's a magical moment. So that's where that came from.
What was the big challenge for you? I know now that I have the story about the fact that this book, the story existed before you really wrote all the other Westerns. But as you look back at it and rewrote it and cleaned it up and polished it up and took out all those words and tightened it up, what was the biggest challenge for your writer brain to kind of go through that without those classic Western elements in terms of what I assume are, some gun battles and some fighting and things like that? Did you, and I guess what were the biggest challenges, and do you think you like this kind of turn in your career and having something that's a little bit different out there?
I do like it. I'm right now, the next novel is about half done, and it's circling back to the South Park series. So it'll be the third in the South Park series, but I do like the different genre of fireflies. And one of the things I found that was really stymieing me in that novel, and it could be the case for perhaps a lot of newer readers or authors listening to this, is I did not know my main character very well when I started. I didn't know his motivations. I didn't understand what was going on with him. I wrote in kind of a linear fashion rather than a story arc where you have the character changing. And Jonathan actually does a full circle character arc by the end of the book. And that took me a while to figure out. But I would recommend that even for pantsers, know your main characters well. And the deeper you know them, the less pain you'll go through as you write the books.
Gotcha. That's a really good one. I mean, if you have a character and the character has well-established a belief system and a well-established kind of motive and things that they want out of life or where they're going, if they're both feet are on the ground in this fictional world you've got, then chances are as the plot comes along, that character can really help shape the story. Because once we know their character and what they stand for, they're going to take certain actions as things come at them, as the problems mount in the story. The characters will drive.
That's a great point. Having their feet on the ground, you've got a basic character in your main characters. But in my novels and in most novels, the main character is not always heroic, whether it's male or female. Sometimes they get knocked off of one foot or the other foot, and they're human and they have failings and they have weaknesses, shortcomings, and then overcoming them, confronting them and overcoming them is really what makes a character more interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Well, from that first attempt at a novel, and you told your wife you were going to do it, and you did it, to today, have you established much more regular kind of writing routines today? Do you have a real set approach to your day or week in terms of what you're going to write, how much you're going to write, when you're going to write, all that kind of thing?
I'm terrible. I am the worst.
It works for you, though.
I do not have set times. And I describe myself as not just a pantser, but a nibbler. And so I'll nibble at my manuscript. I'll take 5-10 minutes and write 3 paragraphs. And then I'll get up and I'll go do something else and think about the scene and see if I can come back in a while and flesh more out, but I'm very undisciplined. But you know, what I've found is there's no one right way to do this. There are perhaps better ways than others, but again, pivot back to whatever you're most comfortable with as a writer, and then ride that pony all the way back.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Absolutely. There's no set way. If you put 100 writers next to each other and follow them all around, the patterns and routines and approaches would all be different. And I like to, say to myself, even when I'm not actually putting words down, if I'm thinking about the issue, if I'm taking a walk and really just kind of not overly concentrating, but if I'm just sort of in the moment with my scene and thinking about other things I might want to add or things I want to subtract, that's writing too. And I don't get too hard on myself if I don't get a full hour in every day, which I try to do. If I only get half an hour, but I know the rest of the day I'm thinking about something, that's okay. It's
you're
progress.
right.
It's progress.
Right.
Yeah.
And I keep threatening to do a presentation at a conference, something titled like "The Perils of Pantsing" or "How I Learned to Love My Insomnia."
It's a good title, a very good title. That's great. That's great. That's great. Well, as we wrap up here, I have one more question, and then I'm going to get to my question about recommending a book or a writer. I was just wondering if you might want to just talk a little bit about Wild Rose Press and just give a little plug for them and what they've been like to work with and all that kind of good stuff.
They are a wonderful small to medium press out of New York. And I've been so fortunate to get connected with them in the first place. They're very personal. They're just good to work with. I worked with my first editor after 2 books retired. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to break in a new editor. Is she going to like me at all? Is this going to work? Am I going to stay with Wild Rose? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it was like not missing a beat with the new editor. And we just worked very well together. There's a lot of input that they ask me about, things on covers, on blurbs, on the edits. We go back and forth in production. They're just very easy to work with, and they've got a dedicated core of writers that would say the same thing as I'm saying.
That's great. Excellent. Exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, good. Well, we always like to give our guests a chance to promote maybe a book you just happen to think everybody in the world should read, or something you read recently that everybody should take a look at, or maybe just pass along the name of an author you think folks should be, paying more attention to, reading.
I would say Zane Grey, who young people today know nothing about, but he is timeless in his stories, in his character development, in his description, in his dialogue. Here's a master at work. And so I mentioned that to a friend of mine about a year ago, and he's gone wild with Zane Grey. And he's texting me all the time. Oh, I'm starting such and such. Oh, this one was so great, blah, blah, blah. So I would recommend if your listeners want something a little different. I know a lot of people don't think about Westerns when they think about their reading material, but I've had a lot of reviews from people who don't typically read Westerns who say the same thing. Oh, I'm so glad I read this book because it's so different than what I usually read. But the themes are the same. And George Lucas in Star Wars, he described Star Wars as a Western in space.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, just set out in outer space. So I would say pick up a Western every now and then. The themes are more black and white than our society today, and that appeals to me. I really struggle with 50 shades of cultural gray today. So I like the black and white themes of Westerns. Having said that, I'm also reading a little different book right now, set during Vietnam. It's called The Things They Carried.
Oh, so good.
Are you familiar with that, Mark?
I've read it like 3 or 4 times, probably. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's heavy. It's just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not finished with it yet, but I would recommend that. And I would just suggest to people listening that, we all get in our habits and we tend to read the same genre all the time. So you might think about expanding your book club selections or the things that you're reading or even writing about. One of the things, Mark, I'm going to do sometime is I'm going to write that baseball book. It may not be as good as Fireballer, but I'm going to write that baseball book, and that's in the future.
Good. Excellent.
And by the way, congratulations. That's such a good book. I haven't read it yet, but it's on the deck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you even putting it in the queue. That's much, much appreciated, Mike. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights, and good luck with the
Fireflies.
I got Fireballer in my mind, and now I got to say Fireflies at Dusk. So we got the fire issue covered between you and me.
Yeah.
Fireflies. Good luck with Fireflies at Dusk, Mike, and thank you again.
Well, it's been great to be with you, Mark. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.